It's amazing how music can change a mood, isn't it, from that wonderful start to the European community. Let's get this underway. Michael Emerson is our first speaker, Associate Senior Research Fellow at the Centre of European Policy Studies, CEPS, in Belgium. I should add also, Michael has previously worked at the OECD, at the European Commission, and was the EU ambassador to Moscow as well. Michael, I think you're going to be able to address the financial crises we're facing and what's the future beyond the mist?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's excellent that this session gets into contemporary European realities with its serious problems after this morning's very stimulating section on Ukraine. But we got problems also. Mr. Chairman, you quoted John Donne only partially. I will add to the quotation, which ends with the following words. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, for it tolls for thee. The thee, I suppose, is me in Brussels and the European Union. Well, this cataclysmic metaphor actually is endorsed by Chancellor Merkel and the leadership of the European Union, who say that the euro crisis is existential for the European Union as a whole. So this is a serious question. But still, now I want to give an account of, or a perspective of what has happened and what is happening now and what the exit from the crisis may look like. To take the cataclysmic imagery of collapse, this could have been banking system collapse, and then later government finance collapse. And both of these two, in the last couple of years, were in the course of happening without, if there had not been public intervention. Now, how were the collapses prevented? Well, the banking system collapse was basically averted by strong action by the European Central Bank, who lent about €1 trillion on easy terms for 3 years to all of the banks of Europe. And then the public finance collapse was basically averted, partly by governments who set up a European stability mechanism, putting in about half a trillion euro, and then, very importantly, the European Central Bank, again, coming in with a conditional commitment to buy the public debt of big countries like Italy or Spain if they got into trouble and accepted EU conditionality. And that would have been, or is, it is an open, it has not been used, but it is an open-ended commitment. And the key thing here about the European Central Bank is that it alone amongst the European institutions has unlimited power, unlimited in the sense that it is an independent institution that can create as much money as it deems fit to do so. Well, how did we get into this mess? Well, it happened basically because the founding fathers of the European Economic and Monetary Union thought, and I was right in the middle of this, I'm very, very close to the people who were speaking out what the leaders were saying in the 80s and 90s. We need an excellent central bank, an intermediate central bank as good as the Bundesbank, and they got it. The European Central Bank is a very powerful and first-class monetary institution. But they said also, otherwise, we can get on with this. We can have constrained but essential budgetary sovereignty that would remain, and banking regulation could remain basically a national responsibility. This combination of high-powered Europe in the money and low-powered Europe in the real economy led to systemic and disastrous failures of a real estate boom in Italy, in Ireland and Spain, and banking, overblown banking, over-leveraged banking in Spain, Ireland, now Cyprus. In some cases, irresponsible public finance policies. But that's mainly Greece. Most of the others, initially, before the financial crisis, it wasn't a public finance crisis. But anyway, these multiple disorders interacted, as we know, with a lot of contagion, and that led to the crisis resolution. But still remains the question how to prevent this happening again and how to get the whole show on a proper, sustainable road. Well, the jargon for this in shorthand nowadays is we need a banking union, fiscal union, and political union. Well, these are very big words indeed. If those things are done, the European Union has been restructured in a very fundamental way. The banking union is negotiations underway, difficult, very difficult negotiations, but it is work in progress. The fiscal union means probably much harder rules, much more binding rules, more centralization of budget power, but also, in the views of many, a degree of mutualization of public debt. That is to say, budget debt would not just be Slovenian or French public debt or Italian public debt, it would be joint and several European Union public debt. Now, these these remarkable proposals, some of them are resisted, the mutualization by Berlin at the moment, but you should see the perspective of several years. This story, this crisis has been consistently one of crisis problem arises, we can't fix this, we don't want to in certain ways, but then financial necessities or political necessities impose solutions that even Berlin and the others have to accept. So they're being forced into a restructuring of the system in ways it's not their first preference, but it is becoming realities. We come to the political union stuff. Well, this raises decoding the language. This is all about enhancing the democratic legitimacy of whatever decisions are taken in the Eurozone, monetary and economic decisions. And these are very, very high-powered political issues that are not resolved, but it's on the agenda. It leads politically also into an issue which I'm sure my compatriots, the commentators, will come on, into the two-speed Europe business, with much of Europe saying, okay, we're willing to buy into a new, more heavily structured and empowered economic as well as monetary union. And the UK says, niet spasiba, not for us. And so the UK is clearly out of the Eurozone, but this leads then into the extremely tricky legal, institutional, and political question of managing this newly developing Euro governance structure within the European Union structure. The European Union would remain responsible, let us say, for foreign and security policy and the single market. But in the single market, it is the interface with the monetary policy, so that's a far from simple question. But that also is on the agenda. Now, finally, and sorry, I'm exhausting your patience, Mr. Chairman, but there are a couple more very important points. This financial crisis has basically been more or less controlled through to Cyprus, painfully, Slovenia maybe next week. But there's still an economic crisis, which is the people in the streets screaming about high unemployment, with austerity being the big bad word used in political polemics. Now, this is a very interesting question, but it's not, in fact, so much just a Eurozone question. This is the age-old general macroeconomic policy problem of how to balance budgetary policy with respect to the objectives of both financial stability and and employment. Now, people are screaming that the austerity measures are going too far within the Eurozone, but you should remember that the ideological or theoretical divides over this question, which are real in Europe, are rather mild compared to the party political divides in the United States over the fiscal cliff business. I mean, even with these people in the streets, the issues are narrower than those which our American friends experience. And one should also remember that the UK, happily out of the Eurozone, is in fact following a policy which is exactly what the Troika would be requiring if the UK were in need.
Michael, I'm going to hold you there because we'll take that as your opening gambit, if that's okay. We will come back to the rest of it in a moment. Can I just ask you, though, briefly, on the first point you make, when we talk about, you talk about banking union, fiscal union, and political union on the agenda, there are many people who fear that those who want to federalize the European Union quicker and faster see this as a terrific backdoor way to doing it, this crisis. Would you share that view?
Well, the F word, federation in this case, not another F word, is not such an emotively colored word in much of Europe. The issue of federalization of the European Union is, as political scientists would agree, a rather straightforward question of progressive centralization of powers. So I would say most of Europe are not in the British condition of being allergic linguistically and emotionally and politically to this word. So I would say the progressive federalization of the European Union actually is on the cards if you take a carefully measured and professional definition of those powers that need to be moved.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I suppose obvious that the economy has an impact on every area that we're going to look at in the course of this afternoon. And I'd like to ask now Anna Fotyga to address us more about issues of migration and social problems which the European Union is facing. Anna, of course, a former foreign minister from Poland. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me, before I address migration issues and open market for movement of workforce, I would like to also to address a few general issues concerning accession to the European Union. With a big bang in 2004, when Poland, other Central and Eastern European countries, together with Malta and Cyprus, enter the European Union. We had certain experience after us. Surely we were in favor of for further enlargement of European Union, certainly to countries neighboring us in the East, countries emerging after collapse of the former Soviet Union. Certainly Ukraine, Poland, other countries, Baltic states, other Central European countries were in favor of accession, and we still are. And I think that people like me, having certain European experience, not only as foreign minister, because I used to serve as European parliamentarian as well, resigning this mandate to come to national politics, because I think it's more important, simply. It's more important for a country of this kind of history to find certain equilibrium within a certain group of nations. since my early childhood, surely time of my studies. I am economist by my educational background is economy. I was looking towards EC at that time and seeing it at a space of freedom, democratic values we used to pursue as well because of our tradition of solidarity. I was a member of International Department of Solidarity myself. So these values are very much important. Yet, after all these years, since 2004, I have also experience in finding balance between community factor and national one. Surely, when you, after so much fight, were successful in gaining sovereignty and independence, you value this thing as much as possible. And you still think that we need certain legal background for integration. I used to be a negotiator of Lisbon Treaty for Polish side, together with the late President Lech Kaczyński, perishing in Smolensk disaster. And I know the content of the treaty, and I know that current crisis was, let's say, the way also to pursue excessive integration, political one, economic one. Sometimes I value this, or I evaluate it as exceeding provisions of the Lisbon Treaty, surely exceeding the provisions of Polish Constitution, and particularly in terms of economic and monetary union, not to say fiscal union, because actually provisions within Lisbon Treaty of fiscal integration are absolutely clear, and there is no fiscal union because it was no amendment to Lisbon Treaty concerning fiscal provisions. There is only a fiscal compact, the intergovernmental agreement. And therefore, cutting this short, certainly many Poles value possibility of moving freely. It's kind of also prestige for them, being sure they are treated like other citizens of Europe. Although, personally, I participated in a cabinet willing to create conditions in Poland, enabling all these people to find their real, credible, and decent place for work in their country. Because surely the conditions for this are the best. It is good for a country like Poland and people like Poles to find their further education in democratic world. Thanks for the United Kingdom. Great thanks for the United Kingdom for absorbing large groups of Poles. I know there are problems, but I also know many of them tend to work decently and credibly. We would like them to come to Poland, actually. I belong to a group, opposition in Poland, a group of people who call themselves Euro-realistic, meaning that we think it is necessary to pursue integration in a way enabling us to discuss it without imposing solution by bigger stronger players. We know that because of the current crisis, there is much domination, political domination in Europe. We would like to find our own pace, and I am still very much in favor of Poland's participation in European Union on real and legal basis. And I strongly support this the same way for Ukrainian society. I think we discuss Ukraine's association so long already, with accepting so many association agreements of other countries, that it should be finalized. There is no reason for prolonging it so much. I think that countries like Poland and Polish conservatives are real friends of Ukrainian society, because we tend to perceive European Union as a group of democratic countries willing to cooperate in a way, in the spirit of solidarity, and we would like to remain so.
You sound like before you put the microphone down, you sound like someone who has grown much cooler about the values and the benefits of being a member of the European Union.
Not so bad.
It's not so bad. Okay. But is that a fair comment, nonetheless? You're not warming to the European Union from what you're saying there. Perhaps you could just answer that.
Well, to the contrary, because I used to pursue European way for Ukrainian society during my term and later. And I think that probably with all this disbelief, all this spirit of uncertainty in Ukraine, also many problems, real big problems, being squeezed between mighty powers, not Poland, because there is no, I would say, security threat between Ukraine and Poland. But certainly Eastern Europe is somehow squeezed with many powers we were used to rely on just backing off from this scene. I mean the American reset. Still, the person looking like this in Europe, I strongly support Ukraine's European way. It's good to rely on different pillars of your security, and European Union is one of these pillars.
Thank you very much indeed. And a small round of applause for that comment. Now, we have the issue of the United Kingdom and its position within the European Union. So who better to ask about GB in or out than a Frenchman, which is what we will do now, as I'm glad to say that Vivien Pertusseau is with us. Vivien is head of the Brussels office of the French Institute of International Relations, with an opportunity to enhance or destroy the Entente Cordiale. Vivien.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And full disclosure, I'm not a typical French. I'm not against the EU, the UK being part of the EU, so I will not destroy the Entente Cordiale. Just to give you a bit of background, I think the situation that we're in today in terms of the relationship between the UK and the EU is not new. It's deeply rooted. There's always been a gap between the UK and the rest of the other European members. It's just that for the past few years, it's been widening. It's been widening for a simple reason. There's been more integration within the Eurozone, and the other countries that don't have the Eurozone but want to join the Eurozone at some point have not completely resisted all the instruments and the measures that have been taken for the past few years. And when we look at the debate in the UK, and this is something that people always forget, it's especially when you're not in the UK, it's completely driven by domestic considerations, completely driven by local actors. There's nothing related to foreign policy in the UK debate regarding the issue of the EU. And in the UK today, and this is something that I found quite striking. There's no more supporters of more integration, or so little that they're politically very weak. When I say that, and it's contrary to, for us a few years ago, Tony Blair was very much in favor of more integration, originally more integration, entry into the euro, etc., etc. But nowadays, the Labour Party is going against this trend, because in the UK, it's not a discourse that a lot of people can hear, that we want to have the euro, that we want more integration, etc. So this is important to keep that in mind, which leads to the real genuine possibility of having the UK leaving the EU at some point. I don't encourage it. I think it would be a disaster for the UK and for the EU as well. But I think it's a genuine possibility. It has become a genuine possibility, and I can come back to that later. The problem is that, and it's already been said, but in other fora, the problem is that it may happen by accident. No one wants the UK to leave the EU. But if we look at Germany, for instance, Germany is both one of the strongest supporters of having the UK within the EU, but at the same time, it may be the country that is pushing the UK on the side. Not deliberately, but it's just because there's two trends right now in the EU. There are countries that want more integration, whatever that means, and it's been already addressed that the integration path is not clear, and there are some that do not want more integration. And Germany is leading the integration path, and the UK is leading the non-integration path, basically. When we look at the policy that the coalition government has been taking for the past few years, it's quite interesting, the evolution actually. Just as there's something that is extremely important in the coalition government, is that you have the conservatives that have been traditionally Eurosceptic for the past 20 years, and you have the liberal Democrats that have been traditionally pro-European, basically. And at first, the liberal Democrats were probably able to tone down the rhetoric of the conservative elements of the cabinets, but it's changed. And we've seen that when David Cameron announced in January that he was in favor of an in or out referendum by 2017, so in 4 years, which is tomorrow in politics. So why this change? This change is quite easy actually to understand. Easy, but at the same time, I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense. But David Cameron has bet that there will be a treaty change in the next 5 years. Why? Because the Eurozone is integrating, and it will have to reopen the treaties at some point. Which is ironic, actually, for a British politician to favor a treaty change, because there's nothing that a British politician dread more than actually institutions, treaty changes, treaty negotiations. This is not something that they like within the EU. And so that's the gamble that David Cameron is favoring. But at the same time, and what he wants basically when this treaty change happens is to renegotiate some powers, to take back or to repatriate, as he says, to repatriate some powers. I think it's very unlikely. I'm not going to say it will not happen, but I think it's very unlikely that other member states will accede to those demands. For a very simple reason, it may open a Pandora's box. If other member states say yes to UK's demand, why not yes to other demands? French would certainly have some demands of their own. I know that Czech would have some demands of their own. Polish would have, German would have, Swedish would have, Danes would have. Everyone would have some demands. So it would open a Pandora's box that no one wants to open, basically. So this is where the gamble could fail for David Cameron. But at the same time, there is a growing debate within the European Union that can change. It's a variable that can change, basically, the chances for the UK to renegotiate some of its terms. And that's more flexibility, which is not a word that the EU likes very much. Why do I use this term of flexibility? Is there's a growing dissatisfaction in Europe within the public opinions, and the fact that this dissatisfaction is growing leads to more Eurosceptic, or at least more resistance to more integration. And so far, it has not translated that much into the political, into the national political debates, at least at the level of government. But it could in a few years.
Viviane, could I just ask you, do you think that tide, you say it could, is turning?
It may happen. I mean, we're already seeing a few trends in other countries of governments or big parties pushing for more flexibility. For I think that Richard will talk about the balance of competences, but to review basically the powers that the EU has versus the power that the national government should have or has or should have.
And public opinion also is turning still
Yes.
against the European Union, isn't it?
No, it is. The Eurobarometer, which looks at public opinion in Europe, the last issue has shown dramatic changes, and for the first time there's a growing trend. There's more people disliking the EU than liking the EU, which is unprecedented and very worrying.
We'll leave it for the moment, Viviane, because Richard Lord Risby will come in just a second, as we have a little bit of a breather and a pause for thought there, because we want to move on to some of the other issues here as well, notably the role of the EU neighbourhood and the opportunities of being in or being close to. And Peter Maras is the Special Envoy for Eastern Partnership in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. Peter, thanks for being with us. Also, former Deputy Prime Minister for Research, Development, Human Rights and Human Resources. Peter, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here. We've got one European neighborhood policy, and the question is about ENP, but of course everybody understands that there are different dimensions of the European neighborhood policy. There's a southern dimension and there's an eastern dimension, and there's a, qualitative difference in those two dimensions. At the south, we are dealing with the neighbors of Europe. In the east, we are dealing with our European neighbors, which makes a difference, as I understand it. That's why, not only because of it, but that's one of the reasons why the European neighborhood policy cannot and must not be of one-fits-all kind. And I'm rather proud that the doctrine mentioned in the previous panel by Saryusz-Wolski, and namely the doctrine more for more, it has a Czech copyright, for the first time mentioned by my Minister Schwarzenberg. And we are strong supporters of this attitude toward our neighbors. It means more efforts, more visible wishes to get closer, more help from our side, more assistance from our side. Well, we as well as other countries of the Visegrad 4 group, it means Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and us, the Czech Republic, were quite optimistic about the question how close can get the eastern neighbors to the European Union. You might have noticed 2 years ago on different levels, once by the 4 prime ministers, once by the 4 foreign ministers, our countries declared a wish for open declaration of a European perspective for Eastern neighborhood countries. But you may have noticed too that we didn't repeat it during the last year. The reason is not the change of our position. The reason is, as everybody understands, I'm sure, the change of the atmosphere in the European Union. And we just heard 3 different explanations for this change of the atmosphere. So at the moment, there's no doubt that the question is whether in or out, but the question is how close. And well, association agreements together with DCFTA means pretty close. Well, we heard today that it's about 70% of membership. Well, sometimes dealing with our Eastern Partnership friends, we are telling them that it's almost 90% of membership. But it's really pretty close. But it's not everything. We've got other opportunities for our Eastern partners, how to get them as close as possible behind the text of association agreement. On the table, there is a proposal by Poland and the Czech Republic, for instance, to open European educational and research and development agencies for organizations and citizens of Eastern Partnership countries on equal basis as for the citizens and organizations of our member countries. And we strongly believe in it. We believe that this could be the way how get the people-to-people contact much farther, and how to produce in the long run a better atmosphere to open again the question, which is still close to our heart, and Madame Fotika mentioned it, and the real European future for our members. But it's not a question for today, and we have to be quite frank to speaking about it with our friends. By the way, during my meetings with our Ukrainian friends last two days, I noticed that these 2 things, I mean, Eastern Partnership and future membership, are being frequently mixed together in Ukraine. And it's not only on a level of personal contacts, you can find it even in some Ukrainian media. No, it's not. At the moment, Eastern Partnership is about association, is about other ways of cooperation, but definitely in today's atmosphere, it's not about the membership.
Very clear, Peter. Thank you very much indeed for that. So we're going to get some comments now, partly on what we've heard, but also looking at perhaps some British perspective as well. Lord Risby in just a moment. First, though, Andrew Wilson is also with us. Andrew is a Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Just raise it to your lips, Andrew, and off you go.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll try and stick to my brief as a discussant to be brief. And just to make 3 remarks in areas where others haven't touched on in great depth, and sort of invent a kind of narrative to stitch them together. And that narrative is that we're in an economic mess, but the solutions are mainly political. It's the politics, stupid, to paraphrase an American phrase. Firstly, with the Eastern Partnership, we need to bear in mind that it's happening at a time when the very rationale for engaging with Eastern Europe is under question and under threat. And we have talked about the search for a success story, but that is proving very elusive. There was a very long list given before lunch, but some of the countries on it were rather surprising. Moldova is in a political crisis. Georgia, rightly or wrongly, is accused of also embarking on selective prosecutions. Armenia has just had a contested election. So Ukraine is back in the frame as a potential success story. There are dangers in that. We can put things the wrong way around. We may be so desperate for a success story that we invite Ukraine into this half membership position before it's ready. But there is a very clear need to show our publics that we do have a foreign policy, that we do have influence in our own neighborhood, and to show the Americans too that we are taking some more responsibility for that, not just in Africa, but in Eastern Europe too. If the Eastern Partnership Summit is not a success, then that will undermine the credibility of those who have put a lot of political capital into engaging with Eastern Europe. Secondly, my own country, if the politics of the Eastern Partnership is in question, the politics of the UK referendum are, in a technical sense, illogical, in the sense that the referendum cannot possibly deliver what it says it will, which is a renegotiation of Britain's position, because it is placed after so many important events: the next election in Britain, a referendum in Scotland next year on independence, 3 more years of economic trouble in Britain. It's very, very difficult, probably inconceivable, to negotiate with partners when parameters are shifting in that radical manner. I.e., if there is a referendum, it won't be on the basis of a renegotiated relationship with the EU. Thirdly, with the EU in general, its traditional modus operandi is to put the economy first. This is the famous Schuman method. Economic integration will precede and lead to political integration. Coal and steel community was referred to again yesterday, I think. But political problems are paramount. We haven't solved the political problem of why the North should support the South. We haven't solved the political problem of why many new European member states should be net donors to bailout schemes to countries that are poorer than they are. We haven't solved the problem of that produced this problem in the first place. You know, why are European middle classes paying for the mistakes of bankers? We haven't solved the imminent problem of the almost certain train wreck that will be the European parliamentary elections next May. Quite rightly, others have stressed what a constructive role the Parliament plays, not just in this part of the world, but more generally. All sorts of Eurosceptic, Euro-hostile forces could enter Parliament next May. Finally, and most controversially, when the EU puts the economy first, it puts the real economy first. It doesn't, well, its policymakers often give the impression that they simply don't understand how financial markets work. Sure, financial markets put us here in the first place, but there is this kind of underlying assumption that they're wrong. You know, when a country's fundamentals, when its economic, its debt levels or whatever are reasonable, then it doesn't deserve to be attacked by the financial markets. That's not how they work. They work via gang attack. That's how they make money. Nor does the EU seem to understand the danger that is done to popular psychology when, by the Cypriot bailout in particular, which has revived fears that were thought to have been put to sleep of a run on European banks in general. So politics first, but I don't see that it always is first.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. We might come back to the train wreck that may be the European parliamentary elections in due course. But Richard Risby, perhaps you could pick up now on the position of the UK, and we've heard it already from two perspectives. It's very much a domestic issue rather than a European issue. Or if we listen to what Andrew's saying there are myriad reasons why it would be a European perspective that's driving perhaps the Conservative Party. You, of course, a very prominent member of the Conservative Party with a very prominent role having been played within the European policy of that party. Perhaps you could explain for us.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Can I just start off by making this very simple observation? I don't think there's any country in Europe that has played a more significant part in trying to secure freedom and democracy in what was the old Soviet bloc. And I think that our Polish and Czech friends would recognize that. If I just simply say this, We're sort of accused by some for not being very good Europeans. But on the process of enlargement, there was not a single person in the House of Commons when I was an MP who opposed it for 1 minute. Quite the reverse, for the best of reasons. Can I just start off by saying this? A very wise comment about politics was made by a remarkable German politician, Willy Brandt. And he said that politicians go into politics to resolve a given set of problems. And once those problems are resolved, they fail to move on. The European Union has been a brilliant creation. It has helped keep the peace. It has created the single market. There are wide areas of immense cooperation on the environment and foreign policy. All of those things have been a huge prize for all of us who live in Europe. But in the year 2000, a treaty was agreed at Laeken, or a Laeken agreement was made about the whole question of the democratic deficit, because even in those years, all those years ago, there was a sense of disconnect between the institutions of the European Union and the peoples of the European Union. And my goodness, as we look at what has subsequently happened with the treaty that arose out of this, I think no fair-minded person would say that that democratic deficit has been actually closed in any way at all. And it is part of the problem why today there is this rise of Euroscepticism. And I simply make this point that I think it is absolutely legitimate for the purposes of democratic consent to ask the question, what should be done centrally in the European Union and what should be done in national parliaments, where people do really have a sense of ownership. Let me just say something about the economic aspect, which we've been hearing about. Chancellor Merkel observed recently that we are 7% of the world's population. We produce 25% of the GDP of the world and over 50% on welfare spending. That 25% of GDP is going to drop by a third in the next 20 years. And we have a crisis on our hands. And the truth of the matter is that the European social model now has a whole question over it. When the euro was formed, we said it would not work simply because, yes, it was a totem of solidarity, that you could not have different countries with fiscal policies and regulatory policies and a one-size-fits-all rate of interest. We are seeing the consequences now, and I'm afraid this is contributing to this particular crisis. So really what we have now is to simply ask ourselves, crucially, more than anything else, is what we do about the reform of the European economy. And that just brings me on to this particular point. In Britain, we have a very lively press. We have a deep and rather emotional thread of Euroscepticism. I absolutely accept that. You read about nonsense that are directives that really have been exaggerated or don't exist. So we're doing something completely dispassionate and professional. We're doing an exercise whereby every government department is looking at the impact of European legislation versus national legislation and how it is being applied. And what we're saying is this: until we have a realistic view about what actually is impacting our country from Europe, then this would be a very clarifying phenomenon. And we're doing this in the fullest cooperation with our European partners. We're saying that this is an exercise that we want to share with them. They can participate in them, and the results, of course, will be well known. We don't know what will eventually arise out of this terrible crisis. All I know is we can't go on as we are. We cannot bequeath to our children a debt mountain which is growing in many countries and a lack of competitiveness, and we have to begin to deal with this. So it is possible, it's possible that there will have to be a treaty, and we will be part of that process. But what I want to make absolutely plain, and the Prime Minister David Cameron has said this on occasion after occasion, we're not in the business of going to the European Union and having a cherry-picking exercise on behalf of the United Kingdom. We are interested in overall European reform and trying to carry our partners with us. And if that indeed is something which arises as a treaty change, which may well happen, or there is agreement along these lines, whatever happens, we will go back and attempt to bring the British people into that process by offering them a referendum. So that is our view. I think it's a rather different view from what I read occasionally about our actual supposed views. In fact, it is not, has been suggested. I hope I've tried to clarify a little more successfully what it is. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you for that. Can I just ask you then, if you seek changes to the nature of the European Union and you don't get all you want, would you be one of those who would say that clearly is the signal that we need to leave?
I was the Europe spokesman of the Conservative Party. As David Cameron has said many, many times, we want to remain a member of the European Union. We work on that assumption. I don't know what would finally arise, but I can assure you that the basis upon which we're entering into this discussion and this debate which we're trying to initiate is on the basis of maintaining our membership and trying to improve the functioning of the European Union itself.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, now time for some chat and discussion. So if I could just get a show of hands of people who would like to ask a question. I can see there's one here and one here, just so I've got a sense as to where they're coming from to start with. If we could start with the gentleman here who was waiting to ask a question at the end of the last session, so it seems poetic justice. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Юрій Войтенко, доцент політології педуніверситету. Буду українською мовою говорити. Окей. До речі, якраз до пані Анни, скоріше за все, і буде адресуватися це питання. Окей. Так. Пан ведучий неодноразово в аудиторію запитував, хто ж з українців бажає мати питання до аудиторії. В принципі, питання було до попередньої секції, але я думаю, що воно має відношення і до цієї секції. Відносно українського варіанту. Що на тепер розігрується? Я б хотів би, щоб ми змоделювали ситуацію. Ситуація перша. Ми вступаємо до Митного Союзу, і Україна, як 350 років до цього, була експлуатована Росією. Одразу його відкидаємо. Ситуація друга. Ми входимо до Євросоюзу. Для того, щоб війти туди, треба звільнити Тимошенко, змінити правосуддя, змінити вибірне, зокрема, правосуддя, змінити виборче законодавство і ряд вимог, які ми повинні зробити. Очевидно, що це все потрібно не тільки для того, щоб ми були в Європі, а для того, щоб нам самим було жити комфортно в Україні. Тобто, насправді, ці питання цікаві нам самим. Це буде безпечніше жити українцям в Україні. Очевидно, якщо ми це робимо, ми входимо в Євросоюз, якщо Євросоюз нас бере, а ми повинні на рівних правах зайти до Євросоюзу і бути запрошеними, а не проситися, як бідні сусіди туди. Відповідно, можемо грати на рівних правах. Що на це потенційно може подивитися Росія? Все ж ми повинні не відкидати цей варіант. Росія, як показала у 2009 році, дозволила Європі померзнути, підставивши Україну. Я не є державним посадовцем, тому можу так вільно говорити. Відповідно, Європа зреагувала це на Україну і на Росію. Шукайте між собою крайнього. Ситуація така. Європа недоотримує енергоносіїв з Росії за те, що вона втягнула туди Україну. Росія має потенційний конфлікт з Росією. Україна – конфлікт з Росією. Який це може бути конфлікт? До самого масштабного, який це може бути конфлікт. Приклад з Грузією яскравий цьому приклад 2008 року. Що ми на тепер маємо до вступу в Євросоюз? Ми маємо на тепер російське телебачення, ми маємо російську церкву. Окей. Ми маємо на тепер російський дорогий газ. Тобто ми на тепер маємо російську ідеологію і культуру в Україні. І протистояти важко. Правильно пані Анна сказала, нас зажали з обох боків. Варіант України – або залишатися зажатими між Росією і Європою, або спробувати на свій страх і ризик війти в Європу. Тоді питання до європейців. Наскільки ви готові захищати обороноздатність України, бо ми не можемо протистояти Росії, захистити себе з виділенням мізерних коштів на ВВП на оборону? Чи готова Європа захистити нас за європейський вектор у разі конфлікту з Росією? Серйозного конфлікту з Росією? Питання досить серйозне, питання небезпеки чи безпеки нас в Україні. Бо вступ України до ЄС не означає вступ України до НАТО в прямому сенсі. ЄС – це політична економічна організація, не є військовою організацією. НАТО є. Чи ЄС може оборонити Україну за європейський курс? Дякую.
Okay, thank you for that. Perhaps it's a largely rhetorical question. Peter, we're not talking about membership in any case for Ukraine, and I guess if it is a question, it's rhetorical in as much as your answer would be, yes, it would be good to join, to be on the European Union side, at least.
Well, we should. It's a question for me. First of all, well, to become a member of the European Union, of course, does not imply automatically to become a member of the NATO. But we have several member states who are not members of the NATO. And your question is very hypothetical. It's a far away situation. But as a convinced European, my answer would be yes. If you are a member of the European Union, then yes. But it's a long way, my friend.
Andrew?
Well, it's often said that the EU is a postmodern security system. It was said earlier that Poland was much happier about pooling its sovereignty with the EU than it was about not having any sovereignty under the Cold War system. That's because there are gains to be made from pooling sovereignty. It's not just a one-way street where it's not a zero-sum game where you're losing it to the metropolitan centre. But all of that is predicated on the assumption that the rest of the world is also postmodern. Russia clearly is not. Certainly doesn't view security in those terms. So my answer is that you will be as secure as the other members of the EU one day, if you eventually join. You will have protection against some sort of problems, but not against others. Russia still has influence in some member states, the Baltic states, Slovakia, the Balkans. They aren't immune, but they are under a collective umbrella that makes them safer in some ways.
Thank you. And Michael, you want to make a point?
Yes, my response to your question is to bring it back to present policy issues. It would seem to me that it is clearly the first best policy for Ukraine to get an improved free trade agreement with the Russian-led customs union and to have deep free trade with the European Union. To join the Russian customs union is a crazy idea in economic terms, and Russia, its leadership, should understand that it's making an implausible proposition, economically plausible proposition. And then the second leg would be that Ukraine should progressively lessen its energy dependence upon Russia. You are beginning to import gas from the West already. Some pipelines have been reversed. You have shale potential. You have huge energy efficiency potential. So work hard at that too.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Now I think we have another question here, sir.
Alexei Semeny, I have a question to Michael Emerson. You've talked about the fiscal union, about the political union, and probably some other unions of European Union. As far as I know, the discussion about all these matters are going since many years ago. The question is, how much time do you need or will need the European Union to restructure itself, to form either fiscal union or banking union, and what it will be like the form, because the discussions at the beginning of 90s was, for example, will it be some concentric circles, or Europa, or something like this? What do you see? What it will be like, and how much time do need European Union to restructure itself? And a short comment to the previous question, who will save Ukraine? To my mind, nobody except us will save ourselves. This is the answer.
Okay, thank you for that. Michael? You talked of two-speed Europe earlier, and multi-speed Europe's been spoken. Okay, well, the question is, yes, in terms of banking union, fiscal union, and political union, effectively, what is the time frame for something like that to come into play? It was mentioned that if we go back to the 1990s, we were talking about concentric circles and perhaps two-speed Europe. What would you say?
Go on forever. It'll go on forever. 10 years. 5 to 10 years for the principal issues at present. But then the most important point is that the structure of the European Union is in a politically evolving process that is nowhere near some kind of equilibrium end point.
Richard, I just want to ask you, I saw you shook your head slightly there. It does make it sound like a sort of inevitability, nonetheless. If you could use the microphone, that would be great. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, for somebody who is absolutely anxious for the European track for Ukraine to be satisfied, these things will take time. But I just want to say this, if I could just add one little dimension to this. If we can get through the next few months in a way where Vilnius works out, then the whole nature of the relationship begins to change, and it sends messages out to your neighbors. And your neighbors have been very irritated with some of their neighbors in turn, but have learned to accept the reality, and it changes the ball game. These things take time, but the commitment should be there on both sides.
Okay, Vivian.
Yes, to respond to your question, how much time will it take? Well, it all depends on one thing. The reason why, for instance, we've moved so far into integration for the past 3 years is that we were deep into the crisis. There was an urgency. If this urgency remains, it can go faster than we can imagine right now. If the pressure is off, then the integration is probably off as well. So it's very difficult to know how long it will take, but one variable is how long the crisis will last. The harder it is on European economies, the more pressure the national governments will have to integrate further and faster. The more the pressure is off, the more they can say, this is not urgent, we can do that at a slower pace. And that's probably going to be the case.
Thank you very much. Leonidas.
Thank you. Two questions, one on Greece and one on the Eastern Partnership. On Greece, the measures that were first imposed on Greece from 2010, it has been proved now that they were wrong. In spite of the fact that they were wrong and they're leading to the collapse of the country, to the collapse of the social structure. And this has been admitted by the IMF. They made mistakes, oops, excuse me. The issue is, why are they continuing to insist on, I mean, I'm speaking about the EU aspect. Of course, the Greek government is in fault also because they're not reacting to it. Why does the EU Troika insist of pushing for policies that do not work? This is the question that most of the Greek population is asking today, and they're not getting an answer from anybody. That's as far as Greece is concerned. As far as the Eastern Partnership, in my previous capacity as Secretary General of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, we had, with the EU, made the Black Sea Synergy, which was very good at the outset. And then the Eastern Partnership came along, which duplicated in many things the Black Sea Synergy. So my question is, would it not have been better to combine the Black Sea Synergy with the Eastern Partnership? Of course, in that case, Russia would be involved in the game, unless you did not want Russia in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Two questions there. We'll start with the first one, Michael, which you might want to pick up on the Troika's position.
Well, the question was what we call a loaded question. Why are you persisting in policies that will not work? The question is, what are the responsibilities also of the Greek leadership and the Greek people in this very, very sad and painful affair? Greece, I think, There are several countries that have received bailout money from the European Union, but Greece is the only one in which the failings of control and proper governance of its public finances and its public regulatory system is in a class of its own. The others have had real estate bubbles, banking crises, but relatively respectable public finance policies. This is the Greek problem at the origin of all of this, and to rectify that is a policy which one of these days should work.
Vivien, you wanted to come in on that.
Yes. I think there are two reasons why they're continuing those policies. One is that they believe that at some point it will work. That's the problem. I mean, it's the problem in Greece. It's going to be the problem in other countries as well. The fact that it's a top-down process. You change and reform at the macroeconomic level, and then it trickles down to the real economy. But right now, the real economy suffers enormously. And the second reason is that there's been this path that's been taken, and no other option is on the table. Just no other option. Saving the euro basically is inevitable. It's been said by Chancellor Merkel. It's been said by Mario Draghi as well from the European Central Bank, and by other leaders. So basically, there's no other choice. I think it's a problem. It's going to become more and more a problem because this one-size-fits-all solution is not adaptable. I mean, it may work in one country, it may not work in another country. And right now we're getting to the point where basically all the reforms that are being asked from the Troika, but mostly in the Troika from the European Commission and the European Central Bank. The IMF is a loose player in this. But the European institutions, what they want, what they require from all countries is enormous. It's an enormous sacrifice. I agree with Michael when he said that there's probably a lot of fault, a lot of blame to be put on national governments, but at the same time, I don't think it's feasible. The solution and the weight and the gravity of the situation makes it very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all approach like the EU has been taking for the past few years.
Is there anyone here who'd like to address the other question about Andrew? So you want a quick word there?
The second question, whether it would have been better to combine Black Sea Synergy with the Eastern Partnership, whether that would have created more synergy, as it were. Well, one of the questions for the session is the Eastern Partnership, does it make the member countries closer to Europe or potentially in Europe? In other words, is it a precursor to an accession process, or is it just a waiting room? I think this kind of pantomime horse, to describe it in a prejudicial way that you talk, would have been much more clearly a waiting room, not the traditional path to the heart of Europe. Secondly, as James Green says in his conference paper, the Black Sea region, I mean, some would doubt whether it's a region, but all of the littoral countries back onto it, right? They have, I mean, Turkey has a multi-vectoral foreign policy. Most others look, Bulgaria and Romania are now looking through the Balkans to the EU. So it's not the central focus of interest for the littoral states, sadly. It should be a stronger focus of interest, but I don't think it is.
Anna, and then Peter. Anna, first, if you pick up the microphone.
Thank you. On Black Sea Synergy and then Eastern Partnership, I would like to remind you that the first concept ever emerging was Polish and Baltic states one. We were willing to form kind of similar creation like northern dimension of European Union, taking into account Eastern perspective. It did not happen, and therefore in late 2006 under German presidency, the concept of Black Sea synergy. There were, I think, because of big discrepancy between partners, it was very difficult to find real success in this concept, in my opinion, and discrepancy in policies, direction of policies. From Polish point of view, Eastern Partnership of European Union is much weaker institution than combined Eastern policy of European Union, because, as Mr. Maresh rightly told us, there are Eastern neighbors of European Union, contrary to other neighbors who are just neighbors of European Union. And just one word about Greece. My opinion is that economic and monetary union was not only economic project, but much more of political nature. Now we have a very difficult situation when certainly we have, because of fiscal, budgetary, financial crisis in many EU zone countries, European Union has to rescue euro. But certainly within this process, I think that we were too hasty, and therefore we have to once more evaluate this. For example, when Poland agreed to accession of European Union, the shape of Eurozone, European and Monetary Union, was totally different than it is now. So that is why we are so hesitant to finally enter this zone, because it brings too many burdens on society, on budgets, on economy, and certainly it was not only the fault of Greek government, Greek society, excessive expenditures, but I would like to remind you that Greece was also one of the biggest importer of arms, with commercial credits and so on. So it's much more complex question than just we have to bail out Greece because of mistakes of its government and society.
Anna, thank you. Peter, did you want to pick up on the Eastern Partnership? Yeah.
I feel it important to clarify one thing. Eastern Partnership is not an organization. Eastern Partnership is a policy of the European Union. It's a different angle, and it's different from Black Sea Synergy intentionally. When we started this discussion about future Eastern Partnership policy, one of the facts we took into our consideration was, well, not so high efficiency of Black Sea Synergy. And that's one comment. And the other one is about involvement of Russia. From the very beginning, we understood that there's one danger in this concept, and namely the fact that it could be taken by Russia as a threat, as an anti-Russian policy. So we were trying to find some way how to involve them, but we haven't succeeded yet. First, there was a group called the Friends of Eastern Partnership. We offered Russia to participate. They rejected with the very straightforward explanation that they are not friends of the Eastern Partnership. So we were thinking about creating something like observation, group of observers. Well, Russia considered this possibility and came with a proposal that they would maybe become something like observer in the group of observers. And it was too complicated for us to accept. So we continue to look for some way how to get them some voice in this policy, but well, probably it's our fault, but we haven't succeeded yet.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Now, we have a question coming here. Can I just see any show of hands? John's hand is up there. Any other questions? We may have one over here. Okay, so I get an idea. Yes, sir, thank you.
Доброго дня. З вашого дозволу задам запитання українською. Найперше я хочу подякувати Девіду за право задати запитання. Моє запитання буде стосуватися всіх учасників цієї дискусії. Я хотів би почути вашу думку, як через призму кризи в Європі ви ставитеся до такого питання. Чи може гіпотетичний вступ України в Європейський Союз підсилити Європейський Союз, маючи особливо позитивний досвід Польщі в даному питанні? І якщо може, то в яких саме галузях? Дякую.
Okay, I mean, we have sort of had a bash at hypotheticals of Ukraine entering the European Union. Is there anyone who'd like to further comment on that, or can we perhaps move on? Richard, a quick word?
Well, it just comes back to the point that if we had used that argument about other post-Soviet countries, there wouldn't have been an enlargement. That is the truth of the matter, because many had difficult economic situations and have had difficulties in resolving them, and some have done absolutely brilliantly. There are very weak economic conditions currently in this country, but if we get through this accession process, then the opportunity with the free trade, comprehensive free trade aspects thrown in, of the possibility of further economic reform, and that's all part of this process, would ultimately be helped, because this country is enormously rich with its resources and could play ultimately a very, very important part in the overall European economy, but not at the moment.
Thank you. And Michael, a quick word from you with the microphone, please.
My answer to your question would be yes, on condition that Ukraine's hypothetical entry into the European Union satisfies the implementation of European law requirements of membership adequately. And you know that is a big task. But I would love it to happen.
Thank you very much. John, at the back there, thank you.
It used to be, not very long ago, the situation in Britain that the British people were generally in favour of participation in the EU, and the British Parliament even more in favour. And in the last few years, there's been a big shift to opposition in the country generally, and vehement opposition in the Conservative Party. Can anyone say anything on what has caused that shift?
Well, clearly I'm the guilty party here, so I have to defend myself. I think I tried to explain this. I think it's a sense of disconnect. And in a funny sort of way, Vivian actually expressed this, because he said, how can we begin to unpick the situation? Because it will cause all sorts of difficulties. But this is precisely the point, because it's a one-way track. You know, if you actually have competences and powers growing to the center, they almost always become irreversible. And you will know one of the great British traditions is very, very strong parliamentary scrutiny and debate, and like changing the law. And so this has been an issue, first of all, of the democratic deficit, and secondly, there is a real sense, because we inherited the coalition government, I think by any objective standards, a hugely difficult problem of debt and deficit. And we're now seeing that situation because of the social model essentially in the European Union. And we just think if our children and grandchildren are going to have a viable life in the European Union and have prosperity, there have to be some quite dramatic reforms. And we want to encourage that on a pan-European basis. And we don't see sufficient evidence of that understanding as yet, but we think it's growing.
Richard, thank you. Michael?
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that as a compatriot of Lord Risby's. British public opinion, not unlike public opinion in much of Europe, is remarkably little informed about the mechanics and workings of the European Union. However, in the British case, it is accompanied by, over the decades, relentless delivery every day by the populist press of Eurosceptic stories and jokes, like the European Union now is going to regulate the shape of cucumbers. Actually, it wasn't actually the case, but it got a good laugh in the pubs after the Daily Mail put it in a headline. So that is what has entered into the brains or the mindset of the British people. What the British people have not considered, and this is actually a response to Lord Risby, is what would be the consequences, the economic and political, world political consequences of UK secession from the European Union. They would be out of the single market with great risks for the attractiveness of the UK as an investment location, and the UK's role, punching above its weight in international diplomacy, would be deflated massively. Now, these are two big things, the economy and the place of the UK in the world, and unfortunately, it is at present the case that the level of media discussion, with some distinguished exceptions, like the occasional story from the BBC World, is not yet at the level of these basic realities. One can hope that the process now underway will lead to that fundamental discussion, but it ain't there yet.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. I know this could bat on, so we'll hang on that one for a moment. We have a question over here, sir, again.
Thank you, David. I would like to, first of all, present my profound appreciation to all those who are on the rostrum for their presentations and remarks. And unfortunately, there is one question which has not been touched upon during this discussion. The question of the work of Constitutional Assembly of Ukraine, which is being prepared, the new text of Ukraine Constitution. There are a lot of controversial questions inside, and public opinion of Ukraine is not informed enough about the result. But there are two main questions. First, this is how Ukrainian people should adopt the new constitution, in parliament or by the referendum in the country. And second one, how we should elect president of Ukraine in 2015, by parliament or by the people of Ukraine. My question is, does European Union take into account or will take into account this question during the discussion about the promotion of Ukraine to association agreement? Thank you.
Peter, can I ask you, are those the sorts of internal issues, ones which the European Union needs to weigh in on?
Well, what we are saying to our Ukrainian friends is that we want to keep with proposals and suggestions of OSCE as for the election law, and we definitely want to see the process of formulating constitutional changes to be completely based on the democratic process. But all the other questions are internal questions of Ukraine, and I don't think that EU is planning to be involved in these discussions. Well, the European proposal is on the table. It's quite clear. It's been discussed by the members of the previous panel. I don't want to repeat it. And, well, it's going to be upon Ukrainians to solve their problems.